Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 44th week of the Free Assange Online Vigil. I'm Andrew Smith. With me today is co-host Steve Poikinen and our special guest Ryan from the American Vagabond. Today is last American Vagabond. Today is day 3,440 since the start of Julian Assange's illegal and arbitrary detention. It is 393 days since the International Monetary Fund loan to the nation of Ecuador, which allowed for the purchase of Julian Assange and trafficking to Belmarsh prison. It is day 1,070 since Reality Winner was taken into federal custody for leaking classified information. But in some good news, it is day 56 since Chelsea Manning was let out, and the 10-year-long grand jury against WikiLeaks did come to an end. But how are you today, Ryan? Thank you very much for coming on with us.
Yeah, it's an honor to be included, guys. I really appreciate what you've been doing. With so much happening at a show like mine that tries to kind of include everything, but it's hard to get away from the current events, that you keep this relevant in people's minds. And I really just can't express how important that is right now. With Julian Assange, as you are all aware, and the whole case around all of this is far bigger than just WikiLeaks and Assange. It applies to just everything we're dealing with right now. So thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to talk about whatever you guys want to get into.
And then we also have joining us today one of our special behind-the-scenes members of Action for Assange, Kimber Maddox. How are you today, Kimber?
I'm good. How's it going?
Good. Thank you very much for hopping on.
Oh, yeah.
But to start out a little bit, so we've seen in the last week Julian Assange's court trial get rescheduled till sometime in September. A few weeks back, we saw his bail get denied amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, the court threatening to release the names of his fiance and children. If you could, Ryan, could you give us a little rundown of just your thoughts of what we've seen transpire since the end of the first round of his extradition hearing?
Yeah, and I could just comment on the point you just made there. I find it really fascinating that we're talking about somebody. What I want people to think about is just the contradictions and all the things that are happening between the way they apply things to Julian Assange and just about every other example you can point to. And in this case, we're talking about with COVID-19 and the idea of social distancing and locking up. And I mean, even within our own country right now, if I'm in the United States, we have an obvious contradiction where we're arresting people for not social distancing and putting them in jail next to other people, yet simultaneously releasing people from prison because it's apparently dangerous to have them there during COVID-19, which is obviously a disconnect right there that doesn't make any sense. But so the same logic applies to Julian Assange. How does it make sense that we can argue that some people should be released, but this situation doesn't apply? And it's the same concept they're making. They're even using COVID-19 in ways to stop things that help Julian Assange. It's going both ways. But my whole perception of all of this, I think where this is led now, I think this, whether, again, regardless of what people think about what COVID-19 is or what we're dealing with, or any of those, the nuance of this story, it's being used in a lot of different ways. And one of those is to keep us from paying attention to what this is around Julian Assange, because these stories are very obviously connected. We're right now stepping into the idea of this mass surveillance network that's being applied because of COVID-19, or rather under the guise of COVID-19. And it's the same concept and the same things that even way back when this first started, the WikiLeaks and Julian Assange through WikiLeaks was trying to reveal to us. And so I think right now what we've been seeing is just this continual sidestep away from what that situation is, while acting like they're fighting for those same things. While Mike Pompeo will stand up and say, we're fighting for press freedom around the world, and then ridiculously not talking about that same topic. Now, I don't know if you want me to get into more of the nuance there, but there's so many topics to get into in regard to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks as a case alone and as it applies to COVID-19. So you tell me where we'd like to talk about.
We've got a little bit of time for nuance this morning. I'm glad you brought up Pompeo, though, because one of the things that we do here, and one of the things that I do on my other show, is never miss an opportunity to kick around Mike Pompeo. And he did. He came out and made this just saccharine statement about press freedom, while knowing that it's his country and his Justice Department and the administration that he serves that is responsible for not just the imprisonment of Julian Assange, but all of the ancillary surveillance that came with it, with the fact that they were trying to steal a diaper from his child, like just the depths of depravity that Pompeo has gone to while trying to make war in Iran, while trying to make war in Venezuela. And for him to come out with this statement is just, oh man, it makes me want to go down to the Santa Cruz Harbor and punch a sea lion. It really does. Not that I'm going to do that, everyone. I'm not going to hit a sea lion. I'm not. They're hella big.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really calling out a lot of these things, at least for those that are paying attention. The obvious contrast there between how they're applying the situation with him and everything else. I mean, and even the discussion of what you talked about, the fact that, I mean, and as you guys well know, this goes well back before the diaper and everything else, the surveillance in the location he was staying at in his supposed now I'm blanking on the word, asylum, you know, and the idea that these are the kind of things that these governments do, not just the US government, the UK government, the Ecuadorian government. You mentioned the idea of the bribe, which is what it was, the idea that this is how they operate. The fact that they're willing to go in there and literally steal something from his child to enable to, you know, not for any other purpose than other to use it against him. Right. That's what these people are. And I just think that needs to stand out. COVID-19 in and of itself is really beginning to reveal that true nature of what this government is. And if you think that they're, you know, if they're willing to put someone like Julian Assange in prison for telling the truth, imagine what they'll be willing to do to you for telling any measure of truth, let alone the level that he got to.
And that's the part that people really need to understand, is that it doesn't take 100,000 people being thrown into solitary confinement, put into isolation for 10 years to change the world. It takes one person at the forefront and then all of the other people behind them standing up for these same issues and fighting for these same issues. So to me, it really comes down to, at least in this moment in history, if people are willing to look at themselves and say, yes, I am Julian Assange. I am a political dissident. I am fighting back against X, Y, or Z. And if I don't stand up for press freedom and for this literal one man, then a year from now, 3 years from now, all of it's going to come back and end up being used against me in these same ways.
Yeah, and I would just add to that comment that's kind of, you know, in the past, we've heard a lot that this, it's kind of a cliche of the past, you know, the everyman, that I am Julian Assange, but that is really a perfect encapsulation of what we're doing. We are, everyone right now is Julian. We are all this situation. And he is a perfect embodiment of what everyone is currently dealing with, or at the very least about to be dealing with where this is all going. So I think that's spot on, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it even comes down to things like the Orwellian surveillance. Like, everyone around the world is now put into house arrest because the government has the power to declare, regardless of situation, you're now staying home. We were talking before we went live about all of the really Orwellian surveillance techniques that are coming out, like the contact tracing and all of these new little words that we're getting programmed to as society. Could you talk a little bit about that and kind of your thoughts on how we're seeing dystopia take place before a solution to the pandemic?
Yeah, this Derek Bros had a really great article I put up today on the Last American Vagabond about contact tracing and this idea that I referenced on my show yesterday, Gavin Newsom came out it wasn't Gavin Newsom specifically, but in California, they came out and they talked about how they're going to be now physically removing families from their home, or rather individuals from their families from their home, if they're sick, which, by the way, is a consequence of the fact that they told everyone to stay in their homes in the beginning when they didn't have enough testing, right? So it's a combination of their own actions, but we're talking about a time where, I mean, we have to say explicitly before we even go further in this conversation, constitutional rights, as I'm sure you're all aware, are inherent. They're God-given. This is not something that comes with an asterisk. There's not, you have these rights until there's a virus. That's not how this works. And there's people have been bastardized, manipulated, and the constitutional rights themselves have been bastardized today by these people that want you to think there's something the government is giving you, that it's a law that they created they can just as easily remove. And that's not how they work. Bottom line, people point to things like amendments, and the idea is that I think it was Mayberry, I'm going to blank on this Supreme Court case, but there's a Supreme Court case that literally said that constitutional rights, or essentially that any law that is repugnant to the Constitution, is null and void, period. So just because politicians get together and make a law and they all vote on it, if it goes against the Constitution, doesn't matter. It's null and void. But see, we have corrupt people in these positions, and that's why it's being allowed to happen. So we have things like contact tracing, where they're now beginning to say, and like I said with California, that we're going to remove these people because they're sick. That violates your constitutional rights. It is illegal. It's null and void. But now they're applying the idea that we need some kind of an army. That's their words. They need a contact tracing army. Gavin Newsom calls them a COVID detective. So they're literally talking about a real world embodiment of the kind of overreaching surveillance we're talking about. So we have these apps we're talking about, which is going to be the first idea, right? Everyone needs to download this app. It's not mandatory, right? But then suddenly it's not going to work until we get enough people, which is what the information talks about. So it'll very quickly translate into, well, we need to for your protection. Suddenly everyone has to have the app. Now they're using all of your personal data. And the point is that translates into, well, that data is showing us that you're at risk, that your neighbor might be at risk, that your family could be sick. So that translates then to a knock on the door. This is real world action that's happening right now. And people need to realize this is what China's doing right now. This is the idea we always use the reference, Nazi Germany, right? This is happening now. This is not some hypothetical, some conspiracy theory. They're rolling out their contact tracing armies as we speak. And of course, it ties back to all the usual suspects, all the same people, all the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation types, all the World Health Organization, the Johns Hopkins, all of these people. And I just think we need to realize that these are things they've been planning long before COVID-19 was ever around. That is to show you what's really going on, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a point that we've tried to make on the show a number of times here, is that no one in a position of real or perceived power has been caught off guard by this, surprised by this. The people who are in positions of actual power have been holding these simulated exercises going almost 20 years now. This is playing out more or less according to plan, more or less according to the way that the simulated events work. You saw it because I saw that you had RT'd it, but there was a Ventura County health official who was going off yesterday on people who are into constitutional rights, like it's a charm bracelet or a band t-shirt or something like that you can just take off of a sale rack, throw on your body, and now that's your lifestyle choice. And no, you mentioned earlier, these are not just, intangible things. They are inalienable rights. And I'm almost positive it was Marbury versus Madison was the Supreme Court case. Where they basically said, like, individual constitutional rights, your civil liberties aren't things that you can weigh on a scale. There's not a degree of constitutional rights. It's you have them or you don't. And it became one of the foundational cases for constitutional law going forward. But to think that the people who are in positions of power within the health community, who are influencing individual state governors, ultimately influencing the federal government on this, have this view of constitutionality, constitutional rights as these items, or potential fads, or it's really telling about the thought process that goes on in the minds of the people who are trying to put forth all of these extrajudicial regulations. And again, this isn't anything anybody's voted on. There's been 0 minutes and 0 hours of public comment on all of this. We haven't been able to have our say. This is just something that's being dictated by a handful of people, largely unelected, who are telling us what to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm actually glad you brought up that was your tweet that I saw this morning, and that is actually the same group that I was referencing, the same announcement in which they said we're going to pull families from their homes. And as you said, it's outrageous to say that this is just something some people are into. And as you mentioned in your tweet, that's just, and he says very quickly, that's a blockade, and then on to other topics. Like, who cares about how we're going to go over that blockade, or it's just something that we, by foregone conclusion, that we will have to overcome. Like, these are all things that they're planting in people's minds, and it's just outrageous to even suggest that it's just some fringe group that's into those things. These people swore oaths to this thing that people are into, and they just act like the point is it's just something that they say. They go through the whole thing just to get the power that they want, and they just sidestep all these rights, or all our constitutional rights, in which they don't have the power to do. Or I should say that they have the might to do, but not the authority to do. They just do it anyway. Thank you for finding that case, by the way. That's very important for people to understand. That's not something they have the right to take away.
I just want to jump in here real quickly, because I noticed lately that they're really trying to turn this, like the protesters that are out there, they're the privileged ones. They're the ones who own the businesses, and they're not the people who, like, I just lost my job, and I'm like, my entire life is dependent on unemployment. So are millions. We're all going to lose our unemployment at the exact same time. And 40% of small businesses, they're expected to go under in the next 6 months. Nordstrom, big brick and mortar stores, retail stores, that's where I worked before all this shit happened. So, they're really trying to misframe people's concern and take people like myself and frame me like I'm a privileged brat for wanting to get other people sick, when I'm like, I could literally lose my home. Because in 2008, that's when I just became an adult. I was looking for a job. I couldn't even get a job at McDonald's because my application would go on an application of 30 other So we don't even see the ramifications of everything that these policies are leading toward. And everybody has an absolute right to be fearful. Do not let people guilt you into thinking that you're privileged for wanting your rights. That's all I had to say about that.
And there's a lot of, I don't even know the word, misinformation, disinformation, societal stress, I guess, about what COVID-19 is. Everyone has an opinion of it. Some people say it's not real at all. Some people say it's the most deadly thing in the entire world. Some people say it's caused by an expanding electromagnetic field that we're building slowly as a society. But I think the larger thing, and this circles back to Kimber's point, is it doesn't matter what we think COVID-19 is or isn't, because that's essentially the wall or barrier that they put up to stop conversations like this from happening, to where we're losing basic constitutional liberties, like the ability to associate with each other. We're losing our ability to literally be able to participate in the world that we live in financially and in a monetary basis. And I hope that there's a way to unite the James Corbett's and Ron Paul audiences with the Jimmy Dore's and the Lee Camp audiences, because we should be demanding that our society be reopened, but it should be with a certain set of inalienable rights. Because right now we're literally looking down what I hope to become like the next era of civil rights in the US, which isn't based on preconceived notions or skin color or larger gender issues, but to realize that we all have to have these foundations of speech and association to be able to have those larger conversations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think funny you say that. I actually see the Last American Vagabond as kind of a conduit between these audiences. It's interesting how that's kind of developed, because it's interesting to see that overlap. And I think we definitely try to be that conduit for people that are just like freshly waking up from things and trying to find their way into the more deeper information you might find in those. But the idea even of things like religious freedom, which you touched on there, they're right this moment. Dabu7 on YouTube talked about this, and the idea that they were saying, okay, well, first of all, which you had also mentioned, how they just say, okay, well, for the time being, you don't have the right to protest. You don't have the right to gather for religious freedom, which is just crazy that they don't, by the way, they can't do that, but they did. But now they're saying, well, okay, well, now we're going to let you start doing it, but we're going to have to keep track of who gathers. We're going to have to keep a list of who gets together and allow it. So it's like, okay, so they're okay, we'll let you have these rights back that they didn't have the authority to take away to begin with. And now they're going to start keeping track of who gathers. This is, and as he simply tweeted out, do you not see what's happening? This is the point. The same idea with protesting, right? They're going to give it back to you, but it's going to be with certain nuance. Okay, well, now you have to assign this. You have to sign up for it. You have to register, whatever, because we have to make sure you're not sick. I even just saw a video in regard to an Australian woman who literally had her child pulled from her body because she was standing, and she did everything perfectly. I saw the full video where she's simply just advocating for her rights, that I have a right to be here. And half the comments are people saying she got what she deserved. I mean, it's just really disconcerting to be in a position where even people that we're fighting for their rights, and they're the ones that are shouting down people, standing up for them. It's kind of Orwellian in its own way.
So we saw recently, we did a special event a couple weeks ago with a group from Australia called Sork Sydney, which if you haven't followed them on Twitter yet or Facebook, go check them out. They're one of the staple free Assange groups in Australia. It's SAWC Sydney. But we had a vigil with them, and they were talking about the way that Australia, which is a Five Eyes country, and ultimately will act the same way as the US, New Zealand, the UK, and Canada, that they arrested or detained a protest organizer for an immigration protest 3 hours before it happened on incitement charges. No one had even taken to the streets yet. It was a socially distant car protest in support of immigrants that were living in a hotel. And the police busted in the protest organizer's door, took him out of his house, took him and his son's computers, and said, well, you were inciting a protest, so you're not allowed to do that right now. And it was, to the gentleman's knowledge that we talked to, I believe his name was Jacob, he said this was the first instance anywhere in Australia that he knew of that someone got arrested before a protest started. And that's what we're going to see coming down the pipe here with the US, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, because ultimately they all operate under this Five Eyes intelligence apparatus.
Yeah, that is horrifying. I mean, and again, tie it back to the whole point. I mean, this is the exact kind of overreaching government surveillance and influence that Snowden, Assange, Reality Winner, and on and on and on are trying to warn us about the reality of this kind of stuff. And it gets farther than just that. This is touching on the idea of like pre-crime, of like medical pre-crime as well. And they're both happening right now. AI type of implementations in regard to, I've talked in the past about Bill Barr trying to implement pre-crime in regard to mass shootings. He's now again trying to roll this stuff back out under the guise of COVID-19. They've also been rolling in a plan that they had designed years ago. I think it was 2010 for how to roll in AI and basically how to do it better than China. That plan didn't really work the way they wanted it to, and now that's exactly the plan that they're forcing in under the guise of COVID-19. All of these things are driving towards the idea of what you just said, that they can use your personal data under the guise of protecting you to do things like that and say, well, we knew you were about to do this. Even under the guise of saying, well, based on this new technology, we're going to start saying, well, we think you're about to get sick. Think about the chilling effect of that. And saying, well, based on our data and based on your temperature and based on your neighbors, thinks that you look like you, based on everything, we think that you're going to get sick and we need to take you in for treatment. And then because that treatment worked, well, you didn't get sick. So it all worked out, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that they're going to be doing. This is pre-crime for medicine, just like everything else. And applied to the protest situation you just discussed, there's nothing you can do.
And Bill Barr already got his pre-crime. He got pre-crime for the Justice Department as of the 1st of January this year. I remember it was late May, maybe early June. But Whitney had come out with an article about it. And so I had her on my show. We screamed about this thing for a while and people just sort of forgot about it. But the premise of it was there were 2 mass shootings that were back to back in the same weekend. And on that Monday, Trump came out and said, we need to be able to have the tools to go into the deepest, darkest corners of the interwebs and stop this before it starts. And this is on the heels of Bill Barr calling the shot. He was at some conference about 3 weeks earlier saying, here's why we need the tools to have a pre-crime division. What if something like back-to-back mass shootings happen? Wouldn't it be nice if different branches that fall under the auspices of the Department of Justice had these tools to be able to root out these violent psychopathic criminals before this start? And lo and behold, jump forward a handful of months, and this is now something that the DOJ has the capability to do, while at the same time accepting or just allowing themselves to have more and more and more backdoors into private messaging apps, trying to come up with legislation like the Earn It Act or the Earn IT Act, depending on how you say it, where you have to follow an arbitrary set of good boy rules in order to be allowed to have encryption in the first place, and everybody else is subject to immediate and total lack of privacy and complete surveillance. And the way that it's always framed, Ryan, is it's for the children. We've got to help the children.
Yeah, and that's so insulting for those that really understand that fight that's taking place, that they're using this. And I argue it's the same way that QAnon in a way kind of latched on to certain things. They recognize the idea that there's a lot of people that are very invested, and rightly so, in defending the weakest among us, right? The fact that there are people in political circles, Hollywood circles, that are abusing. I mean, Epstein is an obvious example. We know that's the case. So they use it. They take it and say, well, this is to protect the children. It's not really, it's under the guise of doing so, but it's really to, like you pointed out, to attack us and our safety and our security. It's across the board in this situation. We can see that this is what they've been doing. This is what they're doing now. In the pre-crime aspect, I think that's something that we really need to think about in regard to all of this stuff. This idea that they can essentially put you in prison for something that they claim you were about to do. As much as they act like that's not really what it is, that's what they're building. And in an interesting side note on the same idea that you said, Bill Barr, basically predicted the very situation that gave him the justification to roll out what he wanted to. Remember that Donald Trump himself openly said that what we need is a new 9/11 type event to coalesce America together. You could argue that's what we're in right now, right? I mean, they're calling this an attack. He just said this was an attack, right? The bigger than 9/11, bigger than Pearl Harbor. So maybe it's not working out the way they expected, but I think you could argue this is that event.
The framing, they've been framing it as our 9/11 for months now. And what did they do in terms of, emergency powers that were granted during 9/11? And along with the Patriot Act, which, by the way, is going to the Senate this freaking week to be reauthorized permanently. And the parts of the Patriot Act that they want to reauthorize permanently are all of the ones that have to do with domestic surveillance. It's not, and this, by the way, this is something that you can still make phone calls about, and you can still send, letters and whatnot, to emails. The American people have come together on multiple occasions to stop the Patriot Act from being reauthorized permanently. Just because you're sitting at home shitting your pants afraid of COVID-19 84 doesn't mean you can't pick up the phone and call your senator and say, I'm never going to fuck with you again if you vote for the reauthorization of this. We still have that ability. So as long as we still have that ability, please take full advantage of it in doing that, because it's happening beginning of this week. And yeah, the fallout from 9/11, the surveillance that we've been under, the multiple agencies that have expanded, that were given birth to as a result of it, the sort of spy bureaucracy that was created around 9/11 is taking shape in terms of in the healthcare sector with contact tracing. There's going to be people who are professional health snitches. They're trying to do it on a voluntary basis. And thankfully all that Mayor de Blasio got was middle fingers and dick pics originally, but they tried the snitch app. They're trying more and different versions of the snitch app, and the cultural conditioning that we've been living under with things like Yelp and Nextdoor and, other snitch apps is basically what they amount to. It is just kind of getting everybody warmed up for rat on your neighbor. Because somebody might get sick, or somebody might get you sick or something. And look, man, I've been to a lot of concerts in my life, and the thought of never being able to go to one again depresses the fuck out of me. I would like to be able to freely assemble with people who are either opting to let their freak flag fly or not, but I would like to be able to make that determination myself. And I think that most everybody else would too. But if we've got paid professional health snitches, and we've got snitch apps that are monitoring, all of your bodily functions and all of your blood pressure and all this, how much you sweat. If you're in a place where you're surrounded by other people, your heart rate goes up, your temperature goes up, things like that, you might show false positives that you're testing sick for something. Next thing you know, you're getting yanked out of your house, or I'm getting yanked out of my house, because we now pose a public health risk to someone, when in fact, that may not be the case. It's mind-boggling why more and more, and I do think more and more people are starting to wake up to this, which is also why they're trying to ease open the reopening of the economy a little bit. Let's get people distracted, back to work. We just gave people a moratorium on rent. Some people got a moratorium on mortgage. Okay, time's up. Get back to work. Slave so you can make that payment. And while you're busy, we'll roll out XYZ.
Yeah, one thing I noticed that I thought was really interesting on the idea of that whole thing is that they're talking about using your data, as you mentioned, to get all, whether you have a fever or anything, using your information. And they constantly stress, but it's confidential. It's confidential, right? But when you dig into it, you find out, guess who it's confidential from? Everyone else around you. Guess who it's not confidential from? Your medical health professionals and the government that will use it to protect you, right? So I argue that everyone here in this room and everyone out there who's actually concerned about whether or not it's confidential, what do you think in their mind they're worried about? Your neighbor seeing your personal data, or the fact that the government or some agency is going to use it? That's why people are concerned. So they're using the term confidential to suggest to you that it's actually that way, but in your mind, you're thinking from the government, but it's really not the case. So it's the horrifying reality is that they're going to be grabbing all this stuff and using it forever, just like the Patriot Act, the temporary Patriot Act. And I just think it's horrifying to think that that's what's rolling out right in front of us. And they're lying to people, as always, using the terms incorrectly, as they always do. And the Independent actually just had an article in regard to the snitching aspect, where it was the most disgusting article. It was clear propaganda. They were trying to paint these people. They said, oh, look at these people who were telling on their neighbors and how their neighbors leaked this information, and now they're being attacked. Trying to frame it as the people who told on their neighbors were the good people doing the right thing. And this is what happens when you pay for doing the right thing. That's how they tried to frame it. But the reality is that they were actually cheering on the people who were snitching on their neighbors for not wearing a mask, for not social distancing. This is the new normal that they're trying to build. People are cheering it on.
CNN ran a piece, because I don't really catch much or any mainstream media, but I ran to get some Penn Station the other day because it's freaking delicious. But they had CNN playing, like a lot of places do. And
this is not a paid announcement for Penn Station. Just want everybody to know that.
But anyways, CNN was playing on the TV, and the conversation was between multiple panelists about social shaming, and that, should it be our responsibility to police each other to make sure that everyone's wearing masks and taking proper social distancing? And I'm like, I just want to fucking eat my cookie and not throw up on the table, because these conversations are fucking disgusting. And this literally goes all the way back to the way that we allow our school systems to function. Because in most elementary schools, junior highs, and high schools nowadays, you see signs posted up everywhere before they all closed that said, see it, say it. Like literally conditioning children into the North Korean, Nazi, Orwellian, see something, say something mentality that's been parroted across the internet, like from everywhere from Russiagate to QAnon. And it's also now in public education systems, where they've been conditioning people for the last 2 decades now to want to tell on their neighbor instead of wanting to build a community with them.
I don't know how y'all raise y'all kids, but in my house, we don't raise snitches, like straight up. I just, gonna be perfectly forthright about that.
Hey, when I was growing up, your teacher said, nobody likes a tattletale. Right? I mean, this is a total shift away from, and obviously the point of a teacher then, even when I was a kid, was not to say, don't say anything. The point is like, look, you don't need to go, oh, John took an extra cookie, whatever. The point is you need to say, like the idea is that if let's just put it this way, there are acceptable times when it's necessary to be like, hey, I think that kid is going to go kill himself. He's going to go hurt himself by falling off that, whatever the circumstance would be. But today we're at a point to where it's like if you even sense there's something slightly out of the matrix normal, that you should be waving your arms and screaming that we're all going to die. And that's the level of difference that we're at now, that because that person has his mask slightly off the side, oh, we're all at risk. You know, and this is fear. This is basic fear manipulation.
It was a couple of weeks ago, but I was at and before they made wearing a mask mandatory in Santa Cruz County if you're going to be outdoors. But I was at the gas station and no mask. I'm paying for gas with my card. And from 2 pumps over, a woman is yelling at me. And I know she's yelling at me, but she got a mask on. And I'm like, huh? So she takes her mask off to yell at me for not having a mask on. And I was like, do you not see how dumb that was? Like, do you understand it all? No, of course, I'm the asshole because I made you take your mask off so you could yell at me better. But, you know, yeah, dude, I mean, come on, I have a theory, Ryan, and it's only half a joke at this point. It started out a full joke, okay? But as the years have gone on, whether or not it's a joke, it's debatable now. The theory is that, do you remember when the Large Hadron Collider had a forced hard reset in 2016? Like a weasel or marmot, something got stuck in the Large Hadron Collider, and there was a hard reset. Is a thing that happened, and my theory is that's what spun us into the dumbest timeline that we are currently in right now. I can't think of I can't think of anything that would occur naturally to get all of us collectively this stupid, with only like small pockets here and there of people going, "Are you guys seeing what is going on right now?" Because I don't even have the special They Live glasses, and I can tell what's going on right now. The whole thing's fucking maddening to me, man. It really is.
Yeah, no, is that are you talking about the at CERN? Is that what you're discussing?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it's funny you say that, because I did a whole thing about that in the past, about the discussions of what they were working on, the idea that they're literally saying that we're reaching into other dimensions and like trying to pull things back, like horrifying things that you would think can't be true, except they're openly saying them as today research. It's just, I totally am with you there. They flipped the wrong switch. They didn't know what they were doing, and we're in a parallel universe today. And it's totally, because I mean, really, it's kind of. But I also would like to pose the alternative theory that, and more on a serious note, and the reality that we have to admit that at some level the mainstream media and the government are always trying to project their reality to us, like the majority, right? So the question is, are they really the majority? Are really all consumed with that many stupid people that are all buying this nonsense? Or are they taking the most dumbed down, feeble-minded 1% of the population that mindlessly takes what they're saying and projecting that out as the majority? Because you could do that. That'd be millions of people, And I know it's hard because people say, oh, I pass people on the street and everyone's bought in. But I argue that maybe a lot of them are just afraid to admit that they believe what we're saying because they've been convinced that they're not the majority. I know it's hard for people to think, but I'm constantly trying to get people on a positive note there to be like, hey, maybe we do have enough people. Maybe we're already the majority, and all we need to do is get people to realize it. Even if we pretend that.
I honestly agree with that. More than absolutely anything, I think that most people realize that what we're living in is a bunch of bullshit. And it's just a matter of finding that one issue that they care about enough to stand up against the bullshit. And for everyone, it's a different thing. For some people, it comes from a loved one fighting cancer and then realizing how much bullshit the pharmaceutical industry is and then where that leads. Some people, it's the battle for Julian Assange and the right to have a free and open and adversarial press. So I think it's, to a level of degree, no one really buys the bullshit anymore. But it's people just need to have that one thing really just hit home for them to go like, wow, this does actually affect me. But I wanted to talk a little bit because we saw over the last 3 or 4 court cases now for Julian that he was listed or called unwell, so he was unable to attend. It started with his bail hearing, I believe, about 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks ago. And since then, there's been 2 or 3 other trials, like preliminary hearings, where he just hasn't been able to even attend in a video link because of just being ruled as unwell in a prison that 2 people have died from COVID-19, that that Julian has said to his friends on phone calls is running like a skeleton crew and not operating at all. I was wondering if you had any like comments or thoughts about that, and maybe some ways that actions that people can take kind of at this point to help boost their spirits, but also to raise awareness.
Yeah, the first thing that I at the time was trying to really draw attention to is that Nils Melzner has continued to try to draw people's attention to this. He's constantly the UN rapporteur on torture, trying to say, hey, everybody, so people know the evolution of this story, that he came out and said, based on his due diligence and his research, that Julian Assange, as you guys know, is being tortured. Right? What's happening is a form of psychological torture. He's being basically, the bottom line is that this will end up potentially taking his life. That's the UN rapporteur on torture saying this and calling for the UK and the United States to say something, to respond, to say that's not okay, so something needs to happen. And so people know they're part of this charter. They're mandated. They have to respond as if they care anything about the rules of law and the things they pretend to fight for. Neither one of them cared to do anything. Right? They just let it go on. Nils Melzner came back up twice, announcing to the world, not only is this happening, that I can see this is happening and it's against the law, but neither one of these huge nuclear powers are even choosing to say anything back about it. I mean, think about how crazy that is. And we're at a point now where he's still suffering. He still potentially could die due to what's happening. And we know every point up until this, we can see that these governments have been trying to create the circumstances which make his life more difficult and potentially torturous, right? And that's the situation we're in, that he's now missing these things because he's continuing to get sick, to the point to where now he's even potentially sick enough to where he can't show up. I mean, we have to realize that this could be a slow death sentence. This could be them intentionally trying to have him just die in prison. Oh, COVID-19. Wouldn't that be a perfect little bow on top of their lie, right? To say, oh, well, he died from that thing that everybody died from, right? I think that's what they're trying to build toward. I mean, every step of the way with the whole process, even right down to the ridiculous little glass cage that, in the courtroom when he was dealing with that, the idea that we're giving him these different style of rules that apply to nobody else. It's just clear that they're trying to create that image of this guy who just is down to the absurd claims about being dirty and the different things they tried to make up about him. It's just all one big propaganda campaign. And I think when he dies in this situation, God forbid, I hope that's not what happens, that will be all they'll say is, hey, we're trying to give him due process and COVID-19. Sad.
The fact that, I mean, that argument falls flat on its face when the official reasoning for why he's still on remand, why he's still in Belmarsh right now is, well, we can't let him out because we haven't convicted him of anything. Right. Like that's their official standpoint. That was a statement that they put out, well, because he's not technically guilty of anything, we can't let him out early. He's just sort of in this period of stasis. And I think as we get closer and closer to the second phase of the extradition hearing, we're starting to see even members of the UK Parliament be like, hey, something's not right here. There was, and I'll get her name at some point in the course of the broadcast. MEB tweeted it out. But yet another member of Parliament who isn't Chris Williamson and who wasn't forced out of the party, out of his position at Labour due to a completely false smear campaign set up by, which is disclosed in the Labour Leak reports. Was a different member of Parliament, but they're even going, this guy's a political prisoner. And in fact, in the entire West, he's the only journalist who's being held as a political prisoner. Like, maybe we need to take a look at this with both a longer lens and a sharper one, because you're right, man. There's a decade or more almost of almost 14 years of smears going that Julian Assange has to battle against. When I talk to people here, and this is not a big town that I live in, when I talk to people here, if they know who Julian Assange is, more often than not, it's only because they saw a news report or two a couple years ago about the DNC leaks. And all they can think of is, oh, my Russiagate. And depending on how they feel specifically about Russiagate, that drives their opinion about Julian Assange. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do here is unfuck that, like what he's being, tried for, what he's ostensibly going to be extradited for, is all from 2010. It's all collateral burner, all of the Manning leaks, and it has zero to do with how you personally feel about a conspiracy theory that every single day is losing more and more of its traction. Have you been able to take a look at the leaked Flynn transcripts yet?
No, honestly, I haven't been following the Flynn story that much at all. Something I'll definitely end up looking into.
What happened was Rick Grinnell, who threatened Cassandra Fairbanks, and I don't remember that dust up back in January, February. She ended up having to leak a couple of different phone calls of him threatening her on voicemail. That he dumped all of the transcripts from all of the witnesses they interviewed in regard to the Flynn case. I'll send them to you, the transcripts, after we're done here. But in them, as you go through them, all they do is shoot more holes into Russiagate. And in fact, Aaron Mate found, and when we go to news, we'll go in this in depth a little bit more. But Aaron Mate pulled a couple out from a guy, an FBI agent who they were interviewing, named Sean Henry. Now it turns out that Sean Henry was the FBI handler for a scumbag rat named Sabu, who was the guy who infiltrated Anonymous and eventually brought down a handful of the Anons with the LulzSec group. So even Sabu's handler, under questioning, shoots holes in Russiagate, because that's how flimsy the conspiracy is on its face. Like, and I'm not suggesting that anyone go through and try and read every single line in the transcripts. There's like 35 witnesses and a couple hundred pages of testimony in some cases each. But you can almost have them printed out, throw a dart, and have it land on something that blows a hole in Russiagate.
Yeah, I think that's becoming quite apparent to most people. And I say absolutely. If you got the time, go through it entirely. I hope everybody has the time that will. That's what we need to be doing today. But, for me, it always comes back to the basic points of how this all started. That it doesn't matter about at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that I think the only person this whole time that has ever even momentarily tried to claim that what came out of this was not true, which was, I think, Donna Brazil. The only person I've seen one time say that. Everyone else has acknowledged, yes, this stuff is accurate, but the problem is that accurate information is the Russians trying to use that to, it's like, at that point, I'm lost. What are you talking about? It's true. So I'm done. It doesn't matter the intentions behind it. The truth is the truth. So from the very beginning, this is accurate information about how our government is lying, cheating, stealing, killing, subverting, and we need to be aware of that. It doesn't matter why. Of course, it would benefit a foreign power that's against what they're doing. That is irrelevant. So we need to be able to look at that stuff, but they're pretending it's not allowable. And then you conversely look at how from that point, and I've seen a lot of people make this point, and it needs to be reiterated daily, in my opinion, that since this has started, they have gone after every single person at every stage that dared to tell you about this information. Of course, except for the mainstream outlets that did the same thing as the rest of them because they're in the club. But at no point have they even attempted to begin to look into the people who committed the crimes. I mean, how does that not tell you the full picture right off the bat? We care about the truth, but we're going to get everyone that told you the truth, and we're not going to go after the people that actually, murder those journalists or anything. I mean, that's just crazy to me. That blows the whole thing open, and that shows you what it's really about.
That makes me, and I was gonna ask you this at some point, but you've just presented me with the first opportunity. According to the 2020 NDAA, hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure outlets are now on the same ground as terrorist organizations in terms of the eyes of the federal government. Last American Vagabond is in many ways a public disclosure outlet, especially now with Derek and Whitney writing for you. You've got two of the better, if not some of the best, living, working investigative journalists, in my opinion, but I've read their work and I've read the work of other people, and theirs is comparably better, that we have out here. Do you have a sense of worry about your organization? I know you were demonetized on YouTube, but like, do you have a sense of worry about what will happen to your outlet going forward? And what's the reaction to that? Is it to go even harder, or is it to back off on certain things?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we all have to be honest about the reality. There's always a level of apprehension about where it's going. You know, I mean, I think it really comes down to that it's an apprehension that you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll all be gone. You know, that your website will be gone, that your YouTube channel's gone, all the work and all the effort of decade that you put into it is gone. So there's always that level of it, you know. But for me, for the second part is always go harder, right? If I wake up tomorrow and everything's gone, dates, square one. New channel, new video. You know what I mean? Like, the only way we're ever going to stop anything like this is if we absolutely continue to stand up and speak, put it out there, right? People that self-censor are, you know, I'm not going to pretend like I don't get why they do it, but that's in a way part of the problem, you know? So I think it's going to happen. I think at this point, YouTube has been officially demonetized across the board for us, super chats, everything. Our channel, our website was removed from AdSense like 8 years ago, well before I even had a good YouTube channel. So it's like, it's interesting. They've been watching all this stuff, but I think it's going to come to a point to where they actually just pull the plug. James Corbett actually is of the mind that this whole thing, they're almost letting out the rope a little bit to allow us to use it to hang ourselves with, right? And they're going to swing back around and say, oh, well, now that pandemic 2 is here, like Bill Gates is saying as a matter of fact, that it's because of these people that didn't follow World Health Organization guidelines, right? And so that's what's going to happen. But to reiterate, that's not going to stop me. You know, I'll be right back here with you guys the next week, and we'll talk about how it got brought down, and we're going to keep going, you know?
I know in my own, and I'm glad to hear that's what I thought you were going to say, but I just, for the sake of having a record of it, and the people in the chat have all been very, very stoked that you're on today. By the way, you're getting a lot of love in the chat. I know that my YouTube channel it's a solid yellow $, like pretty much all the way down. Whenever I go live, it's instantly demonetized. If anybody actually wants to help me get that fraction of a penny of ad money, they got to sit through like the Epoch Times or whatever, because the only stations that advertise on the damn channel when they demonetize your shit. And I'm constantly amazed that I still have a channel. It's one of the most suppressed out there. They let me keep 1 or 2 subscribers for every 50 to 100 that sub the channel, but it doesn't stop the content from rolling. It's one of those things where, yeah, dude, if you push me, I'm going to push back harder. You know, I'm going to find new and different ways in order to get the information out there. We've talked a little bit about combating some of this with low-tech solutions and old school solutions and flyering towns and starting to go back to zines and stuff like that as another way of being able to get this information out there. Do you see something like that needing to happen? Something like that taking shape? If we're all going to be on lockdown, except for when we can go from point A to point B, why not do a fucking banner drop?
I completely agree. I actually have a bunch of people that say that they already do that. Some of the people, the viewers of our channel, that say that they actively go out and will print links and different things and just hand out flyers. I mean, as much as it takes a lot more effort, right, it has a lot more return, I would argue, because anything in life when it's personal has a lot. You know, you send someone an email, means something. When you send them a handwritten letter, means a hell of a lot more, right? So this has a lot more translation there, and it also can supersede their control mechanisms, right? So I absolutely think that's something we need to do. And to the previous point, I think just to reiterate, I've always said this, that at this point, if we right now knew as a matter of fact that what we were doing wouldn't effectively get us where we wanted to go, even to the sense if we knew that what we were doing right now wouldn't succeed, I would argue you probably would all still do what you're doing. I don't know that for a fact. I know that I would, right? And I think that's the point, that we're doing this not because we have some end result that justifies it. That's the goal. But we're doing this because we believe in what we're doing. We're doing it because I would be doing this even if I knew I was going to fail, because I'm not the kind of person that's going to sit back and just take what they're giving us. And I think that's what what's being cultivated right now is people that have that kind of courage to stand up for it.
And that's what we're trying to really encourage here, because Julian said it. He said it best, and I'm going to fucking butcher this paraphrase, but that the more inaction you take against injustice, the more okay you are with seeing it. In so many words, it was put way more elegantly. But the way to counteract that is to start doing something against injustice. And that's why since day one here at the Vigil, we promoted the idea of the decentralized protest, like being the one person in your community that goes out and hangs 100 posters, which takes about an hour on telephone poles and things like that. Because once you start taking physical, real world action to change what you see as an injustice, your vision of what can one person do expands. Because it may feel like, okay, I'm one person, I can put up this one sign. But then as it grows and you meet other one persons, it turns into something much larger. So we really just try to encourage people to do what they can with the time, money, and energy that they have.
I definitely agree with that. I think that's something that we all need to invest in and do more things. I mean, again, even if you do things like this, even if you have your show, even if you have, any level of social media influence, the amount the impact it makes when you actually go out and talk to people personally, it just can't be measured. I think that's something that we all need to do, even if you're doing stuff like this.
Absolutely, because it's something that turning activism or turning issues and the expression of information into something that people see in their daily life dramatically changes the way they view it. Because people see and hear shit online all the time. Like, it's literally like getting lost in the storm almost. But when someone's driving down the street and they see a banner hanging from a bridge that just says no more torture, and then on the next bridge another banner that says free Julian Assange, it makes a lot deeper impact because it places something directly in front of them that wasn't previously there in the environments where they're only allowed to travel one way to and from work or one way to and from the grocery store. So we're hoping here, because we have about 4 months before Julian's second round of extradition hearings, that we can bring as many different activist organizations together as we can for protests in their city, but also for a big protest out in DC. Because that's something that we're moving on planning towards again.
We'll definitely make sure you guys keep me in the loop, because I love what you guys do, and I think this is absolutely fantastic. And I'd love to come back on and stuff as well. And I'm closer to the East Coast at this point as well, so be sure and include me in all this stuff, because I would love to actually come out in person and be a part of something.
That'd be badass. I know that you said you had about an hour, so we can go ahead and close out with you here. Will you please let everybody know where they can find you, if you have any final thoughts here? And yeah, it would be great to see you in DC. Jason Burmis came down from New York and was able to spend a few days with us last time, but because of things like self-censorship, we did not really have as big a presence with independent media or content creators as we would have liked. But it was round one, it was round two, and we're going to go as big and as hard as we possibly can on this one.
Yeah, well, as far as checking out our website and everything, it's thelastAmericanVagabond.com. Just simply search The Last American Vagabond and I mean this, pretty much every platform you can find out there. I mean, save for some small ones that I may not know about, and those, email me and I'll join. I'm all about putting it in as many platforms as possible, predominantly the decentralized type platforms, cryptocurrency based, different things like that. So it's the TLA Vagabond on things like Twitter and everywhere else. So just search us and follow and help us keep the truth going. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
as we transition into news, I think we're going to go ahead and hit that the tweet thread that Aaron Mate put up that really does further exonerate WikiLeaks, further blows holes into Russiagate, and just kind of, I don't know, reinforces more or less everything that we've been talking about for 44 straight weeks now. Let's go ahead and grab that. Okay, I need to grab it too, so I can see what we're talking about. So, yeah, again, Sean Henry, FBI handler for the guy who was called Sabu that helped infiltrate and wreck Anonymous. The question from Adam Schiff was related to emails being removed from the DNC computer, and this goes back to the firm CrowdStrike. Henry was representing CrowdStrike in this interrogation, in this interview, this conversation. He says, counsel just reminded me that as it relates to the DNC, we have indicators that the data was exfiltrated, taken away. We do not have concrete evidence that data was exfiltrated from the DNC, but we have indicators that it was. So they have indicators, but they have no proof. And then here's the money shot, the next one down. He says, there are times when we can see data exfiltrated and we can say conclusively, but in this case, it appears it was set up to be exfiltrated. We just don't have evidence that it actually left. So he's basing the entire CrowdStrike report on a feeling.
And keep in mind that this was a redacted CrowdStrike report that we found out in Roger Stone's case. So the FBI never saw a full unredacted report. And Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity put out their report with evidence that showed, hey, this wasn't exfiltrated, which essentially means downloaded nefariously to another place. It was a local leak. And because of the transfer rate, or how fast one file moved from where it originally was to the new source, that it wasn't downloaded, but that it was placed on a flash drive as a hardware leak. So someone plugged a flash drive in, downloaded all of it, instead of just having it transferred across the internet, which it doesn't appear that there was ever any indication that that happened. So this literally reiterates and puts more weight behind the Veteran Intelligence Professional for Sanity's evaluation, and basically says, yes, Bill Binney has been correct for the years that he's been saying this was bullshit.
So I just, and here's where Russiagate, I really hope I'm not muted. Yay, I'm not. I almost always am. Here's where Russiagate turns into vaudeville. The tweet starts with, Henry, sir, I was just trying to be factually accurate. We can get it up on the screen because the highlighted part is 100% fucking Laurel and Hardy. Sir, I was just trying to be factually accurate that we didn't see the data leave, but we believe it left based on what we saw. We'll do that again. All right, just in case the bit isn't fully registering. How did you know about the data? Well, we know what we saw. We know what we believe based on what we saw. And what did you see? Nothing.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
And this was used for 4 years to spin media narratives, to put people in prison, to expand the surveillance state. It was used to literally derail 3 years of legislative history so that way it can be investigated, because there was a couple $100 in Facebook ads and the DNC got embarrassed because their own words got shown to their own supporters. So, like, the fact that it was allowed to go this far just shows the intense level of corruption and abuse, not just within the intelligence community, but within what Bill Binney calls the Mickey Mat, the larger institutions, the military, industrial, shitloads of stuff, but the academic world, the mainstream media.
Here, I'll get that. I have it down somewhere. Here we go. It's Ray McGovern, and it's the Mickey Mat, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia think tank complex. Take notes. Notes. The Mickey Mat. I love that, dude. And every time he says it, I'm like, oh my God, I got to write this down. And I never freaking write it down. But RSFO in the chat like spelled it out during the World Press Freedom Day thing that we had. And by the way, if you haven't seen the panel that we had for World Press Freedom Day, it's totally worth going back a week in time and revisiting that. It was phenomenal. Ray McGovern, Cynthia McKinney, Kevin Gostola, Elizabeth Voss. It was like Christmas without all the family guilt thrown in. It was pretty rad.
And that was part of the larger. We did a almost 16-hour digital march around the world, courtesy of Candles for Assange and Alex Hill. She is a champion, and that was a wonderful act of heroism that she did. She was up for almost 30 hours straight, coordinating streams, making sure everything worked really well on their end. So big shout out to her, as well as RSFO, for hopping in and helping behind the scenes. We really appreciate everybody that gets involved. I'm going to be dropping a link in chat for our Discord. If you're interested in helping us organize for DC or helping us organize online, it's a great way to get involved. Or even if you just want a community of people to talk to that understand what's really happening in the world right now. So I'll get that.
Are you going to do that through Restream? Like, yeah. Should I drop it for my own chat? Or are you
you probably have to drop it for your own chat too.
Okay, I'll do that then. If we could go, please, to the article that friend of the show, Mohammed Almazi, put up here. Oh, that's the wrong thing. There we go. Excellent. If you're watching right now and you're a regular viewer of my show, this is going to be an expansion on information you already knew. If not, welcome to another entirely invasive Orwellian Security Act by well, one of the more evil firms out there, a company called Palantir, and by Peter Thiel. Jim Killick of the Open Rights Group Civil Liberties Organization has warned the Canary that surveillance and analytics from Palantir is not a company you want handling sensitive personal data. Says that Palantir is already crossing a red line by analyzing NHS data as part of efforts to combat the coronavirus pandemic. The British government has said in a statement that Palantir is a data processor, not a data collector, and can't pass on or use the data for any wider purpose without the permission of NHS England. Palantir itself responded sort of to a list of 10 questions sent to it by Privacy International, Big Brother Watch, Foxglove, Med Confidential, and ORG on 6 May. In its response, the company said that the NHS retains full ownership of NHS data and any analysis derived from this data. It adds that any access to customer data under any circumstances would be strictly at the direction of the customer, which is the NHS. So I before we go into how screwed up Palantir is, I just want to make sure that you guys are understanding this. The NHS is the customer in this case. You, the person who has this software on your phone, you are not the customer. So any sort of like buyer beware or any sort of consumer rights that you would ordinarily have, you are fundamentally cut out of that equation because the customer in this case is the NHS. Ed Costello, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. We will make sure that this gets distributed evenly. Let me go back to the article real quick. It's unclear who within the NHS would need to provide permission to Palantir to access patient or other data, to what extent any such permission would become properly reported to the public, or even if the permission required is technologically necessary for Palantir to gain access or to pass on NHS data. I'm not entirely sure who Killick is because I skipped over some of that, but he says NHS should assume the temptation may exist for Palantir to use its access to the NHS now or in the future in order to facilitate spying or blackmail of individuals, and should plan to make it possible. Killick also confirmed that Palantir's history of targeting labor unions, journalists, and political organizations, as well as its links to the CIA, has strongly influenced ORG's position on the company's involvement with the NHS. In 2013, investigative journalist Li Fang explained that, quote, Palantir's rise to prominence, now reportedly valued at $8 billion, and this is several years back, it's way more than that now, came from an initial investment from InQtel, the venture capital arm of the CIA, and close consultation with officials from the intelligence gathering community, including disgraced retired Admiral John Poindexter and Brian Cunningham, a former advisor to Condoleezza Rice. If you guys are not familiar with Palantir, you need to go to WikiLeaks and start reading up on the global intelligence files. Peter Thiel's company Stratfor is featured heavily in those. So is Palantir. Peter Thiel is a demon, I guess, is what I want to say. Basically like a living spawn of whatever you would consider the devil. He's a horrible person. And the simple fact that these companies are relying on a guy like Thiel, who also, by the way, worked with a tech firm with members from Israel's Unit 8200 in order to supply track trace databases for ICE. The fact that the NHS leans on Palantir for this shows you that they have absolutely no concern whatsoever for your privacy or the protection of your data, be it health or otherwise.
Oh, I mean, we've heard for the last, I don't know, decade now that data's the new oil. And this situation shows it, because the government's literally willing to turn over a private, unruled, horrible corporation to mine and exploit the data of their citizens. And it's going to get sold to whoever the fuck Palantir wants to sell it to at the end of the day. Like, it may start out with the NHS, but 6 months from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, these powers are still going to exist for Palantir or some private institution to hold all of this information about the citizens and sell it to whoever the fuck they want. Because health information is something that intelligence communities fucking love to have. Because while your Facebook profiles and private communications are important, if they can literally know what is keeping your heart beating and the condition of it, they can go way further in exploiting and trying to manipulate, blackmail, convince, or even find a way to kill simply with this information that the NHS is turning over.
No, and again, this is just further evidence of how outside of the box these programs are when we're talking about you know, am I healthy? How am I going to stay healthy? How do I keep healthy? This has nothing to do with the overall health of you individually or collectively. This is more data that can be compiled to either sell you something or take something away from you. Let's go, if we can, to just real quick. And I was briefly out of the room. I don't know if this was mentioned or not, but today marks 1 year from the day when Nils Melzer visited Julian Assange in Belmarsh and then subsequently came forward with his report that, yes, as a matter of fact, Julian Assange has been and is being psychologically tortured. Will either of you giant global superpowers care to comment on this? To this day, there's been no satisfactory response. Josh, that clip is relatively short. I don't know if you want to play it. If you could, please, that would be awesome. I'll go ahead and shut up then.
In Belmarsh prison on the 9th of May, and then also reported back to the UK, to Sweden, the US, and Ecuador, the 4 states that were mainly responsible for his treatment in the past 6 years. And I visited him with 2 medical experts. We came to the conclusion that he had been exposed to psychological torture for a prolonged period of time, and that's a medical assessment. And we asked the 4 involved states to investigate this case. Unfortunately, none of the involved states have agreed to conduct an investigation, although that is their obligation under the Convention on Torture. They don't have to agree with my assessment, but they are obliged to conduct a investigation into this case, which has not been done. They have basically just rejected my assessment. I visited Julian Assange in London, in Belmarsh prison.
Nils Melzer, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, who, by the way, was reluctant to get involved with Julian Assange's situation in the first place. If you haven't, there is a phenomenal interview with him in I believe it's a Czech or Swiss magazine called Republic, where he takes you on his journey as, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, who was basically ignoring anything that came across his desk about Julian Assange, because he thought in order for him to be in the position that he was in, he had to have done something, to warrant the level of attention that he had received from global intelligence, from 4 separate countries that are capable in the handing over and screwing over of Julian Assange. Had to have done something. And when he actually investigated it, turns out it was a bunch of world governments and their intelligence services out to get an individual. Instead of him doing something wrong, he himself was a target and a victim, which is why Melzer now advocates for him.
And the fact that these states haven't said anything, like, not that it's surprising, not that anyone expects the US to come out and say, yeah, we tortured some folks. But the fact that it's just utter silence from the nations that he listed, the fact that it's allowed to proceed, that by the time the second round of extradition hearings starts, Julian Assange will have spent essentially what amounts to 18 months in solitary confinement, essentially rolling out what the US calls special administrative measures in the UK, where he can't talk to his attorneys on a secure communication platform because the only way they have for him to communicate right now is the audio link. He's spending 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, if not more. The only recreation he gets is in a crowded yard filled with people that may also be infected with COVID-19, if he even chooses or can choose to not engage with that. So, like, the fact that Nils Melzer can have been campaigning for this man for a year at one of the highest levels inside of what is supposed to be an accountable international institution, like, the silence is deafening at this point. And to quote Martin Luther King Jr., silence is a betrayal at a certain point. And I think we're well past the point of silence being a betrayal for a lot of this. And, like, just
no, at this point, silence is complicity. It's no longer a betrayal. It is, if you're not complicit, you are actively participating in the ongoing torture and ongoing persecution of not just a publisher and journalist who is an Australian citizen being charged with violating the U.S. Espionage Act, for which the Espionage Act applies, but the First Amendment does not. you're participating in the ongoing torture and persecution of a partner, of a father, of another human being, non-violent human being. I can't stress that enough. Again.
And I'll find the link and drop it in the chat or put it up on Twitter for the people that haven't read that Niels Melzer article that he wrote, because it really is one of the best pieces of literature that has been written about Julian Assange in the last year or so. So it's super, super powerful because, like Steve was saying, it walks through him being someone on the other side that's like, yeah, all of these smears and things are obviously weight behind it. But when you pull away all of the veneer and propaganda, you see that this is literally a man who spent his life trying to proliferate factual information for the benefit of humanity.
Currently putting that article into my chat right now. I'll go over to A4A and do that as well. Do we want to go with the Stella Morris videos, or do you want to?
No, I was going to say the Stella Morris videos. I'd love to get those up for everybody to watch. And so as these are getting pulled up, I do just want to give a big shout out to a bunch of people, and that is everyone that is a mother. Tomorrow is Mother's Day. We've a lot of times forget the fact that these whistleblowers and journalists and activists are humans too. And Christine Assange has done an amazing job advocating for her son for years now, fighting back against the overwhelming amount of internet trolls. Aaron Schwartz's mom is someone that I think deserves a lot of respect for what their family has gone through, as well as reality winners. And I just want to give my condolences to Chelsea Manning, because over this last year or so while she was in prison, her mom did pass away and she didn't have the chance to go to the services for her. So I want to send my condolences out to Chelsea right now with everything that she's dealing with.
All right.
The situation.
And you can spend Mother's Day on my show with Reverend Annie Chambers tomorrow. It'd be a great way to spend Mother's Day. Hang out with Reverend Annie. You got to change the what? Okay, for sure.
Or more.
Uh-huh.
Everyone is in lockdown. It's solitary confinement-like conditions.
Got a question in the A4A chat. Oh, never mind. I see it.
Many others are infected.
You gotta tell me that shit.
I'd like to read you some parts of the submission that I made to the court as part of Julian's bail application in March. I regard myself as a principled person with strong moral standards. Julian is the person who I chose to start a family with. I have raised our children without Julian being present, and to the best of my ability, at the same time as supporting him by constancy and, I hope, stability and personal integrity. I have gone to great lengths to shelter our children from the climate that surrounds him. Julian has respected my wish for privacy and has sought to protect me for many years from the harm of his immediate environment and the glare of the media. My close relationship with Julian has been the opposite of how he is viewed, of mutual respect, of reserve, and attempts to shield one another from some of the nightmares that have surrounded our lives together. After he was arrested and in Belmarsh prison, with difficulty and after a considerable delay, we were able to regain contact, and I have been able to visit him, sometimes with our children. I realize that, but for me, he would by now have descended into an abyss of despair. The most difficult time in Belmarsh was in the months when, in the healthcare unit, he was in effective solitary confinement for most of the time. He is now once more in isolation, this time for effectively 23 out of 24 hours a day and perhaps longer. The limited exercise for possibly now 40 men, together in a small exercise yard, for a short period of time may give some slight respite, but nevertheless, at the same time, the opportunity for infection from the coronavirus. I have feared with strong reason that I may lose Julian to suicide, if there is no way in which he can stop his extradition to the USA. I now fear that I may lose him for different reasons and much sooner due to the virus. I know very well that his health is extremely poor, and I can detail the different aspects of that poor health. When in the healthcare unit, he was taken from a ward into a single cell for many months in a form of isolation, save for a very few hours each day. And I noticed, as I described at the time, that he was very diminished, like a withering flower. I observed how he could no longer function coherently. There's no doubt in my mind that the experience was one which it would be extraordinarily worrying if it were to be repeated, as it now is. It is a matter of general knowledge that the future of coronavirus will continue to require the enforcement of whatever forms of isolation, however inadequate, can be maintained in an institutional setting. All of the fears that we have had to date have now become compounded, since the realization that he is in circumstances where he will inevitably not be able to see us, and where he may himself die as a result of increased risk to COVID-19. Every lifeline that we have had in terms of my being able to support him have been shut down. I therefore cannot help him in the way that I have tried to do. I make this statement now only because our lives are on the brink. I fear that Julian could die. I have witnessed the degree of his suffering over a number of years, which I have found shattering, and have tried to help him, but don't any longer know how. I cannot elect to refrain from making this statement if it might assist the court in understanding that the circumstances in which Julian might be granted bail are wholly different from the circumstances of his life, and indeed mine, some 8 years ago.
So I think Stella's videos are probably one of the most important things to come out in the last couple of weeks, because she gives this framing that no one else has, this personal experience with Julian from a standpoint that no one else in the world really gets to see him from. And to hear someone that intimately close to him talk in a way that expresses the fact that, like, this could very literally be the end of Julian in multiple different ways, whether he's extradited and commits suicide in the US, whether he dies of COVID-19, and the fact that right now in this moment where he is held for no crime, for no charge short of the US wanting to prosecute him, is facing 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. That's just, for anyone who believes in any type of idea of the rule of law, should be unacceptable. And beyond that fact, that this man is literally being held for revealing the war crimes while the war criminals walk free. It's just...
In the meantime, anybody who protests outside of his prison now, they're being dispersed for breaking the coronavirus rules. And they make this like big deal about putting other people's lives at risk. But when people go out there to protest for one life that if it's taken away, the consequences, like I can't even fathom what would happen if Julian Assange was no longer with us. And they're saying we're not even allowed to fight for that anymore. And we're just supposed to watch this man dwindle away. He can't show up to his own freaking hearings. And nobody says a word. Pay attention to the progressive media, who has said that Julian has been too sick to appear in front of a judge through a video chat. How hard is it to appear through a video chat? How sick do you have to be? Where you can't even do that much. And I just wish that people would really focus on that, and that the people who are shaming others for wanting to stand up for Julian and willing to go out there and risk coronavirus or whatever, that they're the most selfless people. And I just want to continue to push everybody to get out there if you can fly or if you can banner, like whatever you can do, please do it, because time is really of the essence right now. We don't have months. We don't have their time frame that they're giving us. We have, I mean, it could be a matter of days. We have no idea. They won't tell us anything, and we're kept in the dark. So just please keep fighting.
Yeah, if you were ever wondering when would be the right time to do something, it's right now. It's right now. And it's not in our nature to like shame anyone for coming late to the party. Really, we clearly would like to have seen this covered more and covered more frequently. But if that's what it takes to get somebody over the edge to come on board and start reporting on this with some consistency and some clarity, great. Thank you. Please do that. If you're watching right now and you have a favorite content creator and you don't see Julian Assange being discussed regularly on their show, let them know. Let them know that you, as the consumer of their product, want to see this out of them. And hopefully it works. And if it doesn't, you can always watch my show. I think that's gonna do it for today, y'all. We can go ahead and give some final thoughts here, unless there's a question or two in the chat.
Yeah, I figure I'll talk for a second while the questions kind of filter in. On our website, we put up weekly actions for people to take. This week, it is driving by Mike Pompeo's Twitter and leaving some comments on the fact that he said that he defends the free press and people that release accurate information. We also have listed on there multiple global free press institutions throughout the US and Europe, as well as I think there's one or two from Australia. A lot of them have spoken out in favor of Julian. We're just asking people to politely ask them to do more. We also have 4 different House of Representative members on there that people can contact to say, hey, please speak up, because these are people that are supposed to be like radicals and revolutionaries. And then we also have our GoFundMe up that's running right now. And for the people watching, I will drop it in the chat, but we are trying to get back to DC again to hold a second round of protests for the extradition hearing that is coming up in September. If you're able to, please donate. If you are not able to, because we live in a fucking hilariously terrible world right now, please just share the link out, because we're trying to get as many people as we can involved. And also hop onto our Discord to help us organize this, because we need as many voices as we can participating. But I appreciate everyone for watching us. If you would like to follow me, I'm Andrew Zigmund on Twitter, Zigmund. You can find all of this on action_4 Assange on Twitter. We also have a Facebook page up, thanks to the wonderful Kimber. And you can find us on Rockfin as well. And also actionforassange.com. And I really appreciate Ryan for joining us and everyone for watching.
Hi, I'm Kimber. You can't really find me anywhere because I've been banned off the internet, but I am around. So I just, I'm mostly in the background, but I really appreciate everyone having me on, and it's been fun watching. And yeah, thanks to the guests and to my co-hosts who have been doing this for, this is week 43. So 44, they've been doing this for 44 weeks, guys, straight. And I'm just really proud of them. And thank you, guys.
If you're just seeing me for the first time, my name is Steve Boykin, and I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find that on YouTube by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I'm also on multiple other platforms, including the Rockfin. Tomorrow, again, Reverend Annie Chambers will be back on the show. She is absolutely wonderful. Corey Morningstar, who has done such prolific work through Art of Annihilation and WrongKindOfGreen.com, is going to be on soon. Don't have a confirmation for that, but she's going to be on soon. Monday, Whitney Webb. Wednesday, Danny Sherson. I get really good guests, and I don't even know why. So please check that show out. Thank you very much to the co-hosts. Thank you to Ryan from Last American Vagabond. He'll be on my show here soon now too. Everybody watching, we love you guys. Thank you so much. It's pointless doing this without you, because you're ultimately the activists that we're supporting as well. Until Tuesday, when our guest will be Nozomi Hayase. We'll see you then. Good luck to us.